I'm going to call the Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Second Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on the Veterans Affairs Legislation Amendment, Mental Health and Other Measures Bill 2014, and in doing so acknowledge the important role that the military plays in my Riverina electorate. Indeed, Wagga Wagga, my hometown, is home to 3 military bases: the Army Recruit Training Battalion at Kapooka, the Royal Australian Air Force Base, and indeed a Navy base. Even though we're a long, long way from seawater, we have an important training Navy base there, which does a lot of good work with HMAS Albatross at Nowra, as well as in conjunction with the RAF base at Forest Hill. And certainly I speak to a number of veterans and their families about post-traumatic stress disorder. I speak to them about the stresses and strains that Army, Air Force and Navy life place upon themselves and their families, and when they, even when they're currently serving, and as well as when they finish their service, many do feel the strain of that service, and certainly these people place online their lives each and every day when in uniform on behalf of our nation. We, as a parliament, send those men and those women to conflict, to places where many of us would not like to go. Certainly many of us would not like to visit, let alone take up an active combat participation in those places. And it is indeed incumbent upon us as a parliament, as the people who actually send these people to war and into the combat zone, to look after them when their service has finished, to look after them during their time of service. And the Veterans Affairs Legislation Amendment, Mental Health and Other Measures Bill 2014 does this in part, and as well the Coalition's other measures which have helped in the proper and fair indexation has also gone to helping veterans who served our country and serve our country so well. This legislation will improve and enhance mental health services for veterans and their families by enlarging eligibility for non-liability health care for veterans and ex-service people, as well as providing access to the Veterans and Veterans Families Counselling Service, the VVCS. There are a series of other minor amendments to legislation affecting veterans and their families. Now, the bill implements recommendations from the review of military compensation arrangements and other measures announced in the 2013-14 budget. These measures are non-controversial and they're very beneficial in nature, Deputy Speaker. The government has a 4-pillar approach to veterans affairs. Firstly, recognising the unique nature of military service. Secondly, maintaining a standalone Department of Veterans Affairs. Thirdly, tackling mental health challenges facing veterans and their families. And finally, providing adequate advocacy and welfare support for veterans and their families. This legislation assists the Coalition to deliver its agenda for veterans and their families. And I might just digress a little to talk about, and I mentioned Kapooka before, and on the 21st of May 1945, just months from the end of World War II, a tragic event occurred at the Engineers Training Base at Kapooka. While being shown demolition and explosive procedures, an enormous explosion occurred in a dugout, killing 26 personnel. The Daily Advertiser, the local newspaper, described the funerals which followed as Wagga's saddest day. Indeed, it was. Kapooka Camp had been established by the Australian Government as the main Royal Australian Engineers training facility in Eastern Australia just 3 years earlier. On that particular day, 21 May 1945, 2 instructors were taking 26 young conscript sappers through training in the use of explosives. They were located in a dugout where men usually waited while an explosion occurred above ground level. This and 2 other underground rooms were located a large distance away from the Kapooka buildings towards today's suburb of San Isidore. An enormous explosion occurred in the dugout about 2:45 p.m. 24 sappers died, plus 2 instructors. 2 men who were just outside survived. The sound of the explosion could be heard in Wagga Wagga, the city of Wagga Wagga, more than 10 kilometres away. Now, if that event happened today, you could just imagine what would transpire, what would follow. You know, it would be of enormous consequence to this parliament, to our nation, and indeed to the military. But you know, sadly, and it was during obviously a time of conflict, the Second World War, and it occurred, and it was just, I won't say forgotten, but it certainly it didn't receive the attention, the respect, the dignity that it should have. And it was only in recent years that a formal memorial has been placed near to the site where this occurred. The actual site is now in private farming hands, but it's not very far. It's just a stone's throw from the actual site. But each and every year now, on 21 May, Kapuka and the community of Wagga Wagga comes together to acknowledge and to commemorate that dreadful event. And I say this in the context of this particular debate because the stress and the strain and the mental anguish that surely followed that awful occurrence back in 1945, when times were admittedly a little different, was far different than what would have happened today. And certainly the families back in the 1940s and even the decades after did not receive, sadly, the due respect and the treatment and certainly the provisions that the current government would provide. And indeed, all members across the House would acknowledge that such an event deserves to have the respect and certainly the financial provisions for those affected families. But of course, life was much different back those days, and certainly even the we talk about World War I, we talk about World War II, and the tens of thousands of Australians, indeed 102,000 Australians have died in conflict. But in World War I and World War II, many of those people came back and were expected to get on with their life as per normal. They were expected to just fit back into society, fit back into their families, fit back into the social fabric of society. But we know now that they must have suffered the same sorts of stresses and strains that our current serving men and women feel. And but of course, as I say, life is very different these days. Emotions are different, and certainly we as a government and we as a parliament, because I know this has cross-house support, that we should treat our former military personnel with the utmost respect and certainly provide the financial assistance and the counselling and the care that they deserve, because they do, as I say, place their lives on the line each and every day. And I stand here with giving this speech with the Parliamentary Secretary for Defence alongside me, and I know the efforts that he's gone to in his role as the Parliamentary Secretary for Defence to ensure that not just this legislation, but indeed fairness is provided to our veterans. That certainly that I know the role he is playing to ensure that our veterans are well catered for, not only whilst they're still wearing uniforms. Our service people, not only whilst they're still wearing uniforms, but when their retirements come and they've packed the uniforms away, their careers are done and dusted, and they're getting on with their life. And I know he has spoken to many families and many people to see what he can do in his capacity as Parliamentary Secretary to help them to adjust to normal civilian life. The Abbott Coalition government has delivered on its 2013 election promise. Indeed, it was also our election promise in 2010 to the 57,000 military superannuants and their families, and it's part of the responsibility I know the Parliamentary Secretary takes very seriously. I know that it's certainly something that the Minister for Veterans Affairs, Senator the Honourable Michael Ronaldson, and Assistant Minister for Defence, the Honourable Stuart Robert, the member for Fadden, also take very seriously. And on 27 March this year, they welcomed the passage of the Defence Force Retirement Benefits Legislation Amendment, Fair Indexation Bill 2014, through the Senate, giving effect to the government's, the Coalition's, commitment to give veterans a fair go. This is what this legislation is doing, and certainly the fair indexation is what happened back in March. It was a day of fairness. The 27th of March was a day of fairness. It showed, it exemplified, it underlined that the government had fulfilled its pledge to give veterans the compensation, the indexation that they deserve. We made the promise and we kept it to the letter, Senator Ronaldson said in announcing the fact that it had gone through the Senate and it had become legislation. Now, from 1 July 2015, Defence Force Retirement Benefits Scheme, DFRB, and Defence Force Retirement and Death Benefits Scheme, DFRDB, military superannuants aged 55 and over will have their pensions indexed in the same way as age and service pensions. The fair indexation provisions will also extend to reversionary widow pensioners aged 55 years and over. This is very important. It's been a long-fought campaign for justice, for equity and for fairness. And I know Bert Hobie, a former Deputy Commandant at Kapooka, has made innumerable representations to me, Deputy Speaker, both via email, via telephone and certainly in person, to ensure that their pensions were fairly indexed. Now, I know he would argue now that it still doesn't go enough way to providing what they require and what they need, but it's a big step in the right direction, and certainly something that we have delivered upon as a coalition government, and certainly something that had not been delivered upon despite the promises of the previous government. The Assistant Minister for Defence said that from at the time of this particular superannuation indexation going through the Senate, that from 1 July this year military superannuants and their families would benefit from the change in indexation arrangements, and I say not before time. The passing of this legislation today, this is I'm quoting from the member for Fadden, confirms this government's recognition of the unique nature of military service and the sacrifices military personnel and their families make on behalf of all Australians. I'm sure the Parliamentary Secretary for Defence would certainly agree. This legislation is an investment in fairness. It will ensure the purchasing power of DFRB and DFRDB military superannuation pensions is maintained, which is something that Bert Hobie, retired now from the Army, but certainly not retired from active service of sorts, was stressing to me all along. By passing this legislation, veterans and their families have finally been delivered the fair go that they deserve and that this parliament should have provided many years ago. But certainly with the Veterans Affairs legislation amendment before the House today, it expands eligibility for non-liability health care to current and former members of the Australian Defence Force with 3 years continuous full-time peacetime service from 7 April 1994. It addresses an anomaly in eligibility and will provide early intervention treatment. The high rates of comorbidity between the existing mental health conditions and alcohol and substance use disorders is a driver for extending treatment coverage of these conditions, and we heard the member for Ryan just a little earlier talk about this very fact. Schedule 2 increases access to counselling from the Veterans and Veterans' Families Counselling Service. The previous budget allocated $6.4 million to expand services to include members of the Australian Defence Force with service in border protection roles, as well as submarine and disaster zone personnel along with their families. Newly eligible members and former members will be advised of the changes once they're passed by Parliament, and hopefully that will be very soon. These people who put their lives on the line, who put their lives basically on hold and their families on hold for the time that they've provided such sacrifice and dedication on behalf of our nation, they deserve to know. They deserve to know very quickly that this legislation has gone and is going through. Now, Schedule 3 takes away the requirement for Commonwealth Seniors Health Card holders to reapply for their card if they travel overseas for more than 6 weeks. Currently, when a CSHC holder travels overseas for more than that period, their associated seniors supplement are cancelled. They must reclaim, as well as their CSHC, and they must reclaim that upon their return to regain the benefit that is provided. The amendments will suspend a payment of the 6-week period and reinstate it upon the recipient's return to Australia, and that's necessary. Schedule 4 makes a series of changes to the Veterans Review Board. These measures introduce alternative dispute resolution to help define the issues in dispute and identify any additional evidence required for the appeal, and that too is important. We've also talked about the amendments also intending to give the VRB, the Veterans Review Board, greater case management powers to resolve matters before it more efficiently, and that's necessary. Schedule 6 aligns the wholly dependent status of an eligible young person not living with the member but for whom the member is liable to pay child support. And finally, Schedule 7 will again allow the Chief Executive Officer of Comcare to be nominated for appointment to the Military Rehabilitation and Compensation Commission, which rectifies inadvertent disqualification of the CEO from nomination for appointment which occurred in 2012 and arising from changes to the Safety, Rehabilitation and Compensation Act 1988. Deputy Speaker, this legislation is important. Our military people do have unique responsibilities to our nation. We have, as a parliament, unique responsibilities to them. The fair indexation has gone part of the way to providing our responsibility back to those veterans. This particular debate, this particular legislation enhances that. It is important. Mental health is a big factor for these people, and I commend the bill to the House. Thank you.
Thank the Parliament.